Hello, everybody, and today I'm joined by Will Washington of the Rhapsody podcast and the RBR Wrestling podcast. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and let's get to it.
I've been podcasting 16 years, and so part of what got me into podcasting, because when you really think about podcasting, it's really only been around about 17 years, and it was new technology. And I'm a really big tech head. I'm a software developer for a living. It's what I do, and I saw this new technology that was out there, because it really wasn't just about the talking; it was about the distribution of the content and the way it was being distributed. And I was actually really interested in that. And there weren't too many people doing it, talking about wrestling at the time. I think there were two others at the time. And that made me decide that I wanted to be one of the first to do it. And I just kind of got addicted to it. I love talking. I love talking to people. And that's why I'm here. And so doing the podcast for me just made sense. It made sense for who I was. I was 18 at the time. I'm 34 now, just turned 34. And so, yeah, it was just about being on the forefront of a technology that was brand new. And, now podcasting is so ingrained in what people do in their everyday lives, and they listen to them. And it's just felt good to be able to say that I was, I've had people call me a pioneer. I don't know if I would necessarily use that term, but it has been nice to be on that side of it and be able to say I've been doing it as long as I have been.
So, so you see new people coming on the scene? You sometimes think these I was here way before all of you thought it was cool because it has become cool to have a podcast. Everybody has a podcast nowadays.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having a little bit of trouble with the last question.
I I basically said sometimes you must think when you see all these new people coming into the podcasting space, I was here before all of you.
Yeah, so that is interesting, because there are so many people doing them now. I mean, wrestling podcasts in particular are a dime a dozen. There's so many out there, right? And yeah, to me it is sorry, my phone just went off. I wasn't sure what that was. But yeah, there's so many now that I honestly sometimes question. And I think, honestly, doing Grapsody is a good example of answering that question. But I sometimes question, had I stepped into it even just 2 years later, would I have been able to find the footing that I found? And luckily with Grapsody, now granted, Grapsody is a part of Fightful, and so we have a much bigger platform than a lot of people who don't necessarily have the means of just jumping into podcasting on their own right now. But at the same time, yeah, it has been just fascinating to watch it grow and to watch so many people get into it. And that, like, doing a wrestling podcast can mean a lot of things, because there's a lot of wrestlers who have podcasts now. There's a lot of ex-wrestlers who have podcasts. And there's a lot of industry people that do them. And so it can mean a lot of things. It could mean you're a fan talking about it. It can mean you're an insider talking about it. It can mean that you're a former wrestler who's just giving some insight into the industry today, or you could be giving advice. There's so many different ways to do it now. So yeah, it was nice though to be on that side of it and to help get it started.
So, as somebody that started really, as somebody that started early in the podcasting game, you think it's become a bit too easy for people to start their own podcast?
So as far as starting their own, I've always said to people that the best thing that, the hard thing, especially when it comes to pro wrestling, is that every take in pro wrestling has likely been dropped. Every opinion and style on pro wrestling has likely been said already. So really, I've always told people when it comes to starting up a podcast, and a great example of that are my dudes over at Public Enemies. I think they're a great example of it. Is sometimes what you have to offer to podcasting is you, because there's really only one you, and there's really only one of anybody. And I always say that my advice to anybody who is starting up a podcast for any particular topic is make sure you're offering as much of you as you can, because there's only one you. And while you offering your opinions on that one particular topic may be a dime a dozen, you doing it specifically isn't. And so I always say to people, just bring you to the table, and I guarantee you somebody is going to be there for you and love what you have to offer on it.
I would agree with that, because sometimes people send me their podcast and they only just started out, but they send me their first episode, and I listen to them, yeah, and I don't want to say they're bad, but they're like, they don't really bring anything different to the table, if you know what I mean. They just regurgitate what other people say.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and that's why I tell people, just bring you. Don't bring somebody else. Don't bring somebody else's opinions you heard elsewhere. Don't bring don't try to be anybody else, because I guarantee you bring yourself, there's going to be an audience for you. For me, it's like I've always tried to ask myself, who's listening to this? And in the same way that there's only one of you, as far as who you are specifically, there's likely many of you as far as what your taste is. And so on the flip side of that, I've always said that what you specifically have to offer may not appeal to everybody, but if it appeals to you, chances are it might appeal to somebody else. There's chances are there's somebody else who feels the way you do. And so on the same side of offering yourself and offering your unique perspective, keep in mind that if you like what you're putting out, chances are there's also somebody else who likes it. And so for me, it's like, for a long time, I used to question myself and think, who is this for? Who am I doing this for when I'm the only person who finds this funny? And then I would think, but I find this funny. And if I find this funny, chances are somebody else finds this funny. And so I'm going to do this. And if it puts off people, fine. But as long as there's somebody else like me who has my sense of humor and finds it funny or finds it good, then we're good. And we're going to keep doing it. And that's how we do what we do. And that's how I've been able to do it for so long.
Agree. So when was the first time you started to realise that people were actually interested in what you had to say? Because I imagine when you first started, you spent a lot of time just speaking to yourself, basically.
So you know what? It was honestly, well, I had a bit of a cheat code, I'm not going to lie, because when we started RBR, we started on the IGN message boards. It was the Wrestling General Board on IGN. And so it was a group of, because we always we called it the WGB at the time. And we had a community there. And so when I started RBR, it was myself, and I had picked up, I went first to Nick Marsico, who was Commish 13 on the IGN forums. And I asked him to join me because I knew he had experience with his college radio. And I asked Anthony Scatz just because he was a friend of mine who I talked to every single day. And I knew he was somebody I wanted to podcast with. And then I asked Michael Z because, again, Michael Z had radio experience. He had gone to Specs Howard in Michigan, and he had experience. So I went to those four, or it was the four of us, because we all had experience talking. And except for me, I was actually the only one who didn't. But I knew if I went to guys who had experience with conversation that people could hear, I knew we could build something. But the thing about building an audience was, like I said, we had a little bit of a cheat, right? Because I dropped the podcast just on the IGN forums originally. I just dropped an MP3 file, loaded and posted a link to all of these people who were part of the WGB, and they all listened to it. They gave us feedback. And so we had an instant community of people. And a lot of those people are still around. Shout out to Marcelo on Twitter. He's been around since day one. And there's BC, who is Broken Cycle on the IGN forums, Josh Swallow. There's so many guys, Mike Harmeyer. There's so many guys who were around at that time that helped kind of give us that audience. So when we posted the show to iTunes and posted the show to other sites, like there was Odeo, which I think later became Twitter, there were a lot of sites and whatnot that we were able to then get the show on, but it kind of already had a built-in audience behind it. So other people kind of found the show and suddenly were like, well, these guys seem like they're having a bit of like a party every week with these listeners who are in the chat and all of this stuff. And people started jumping in. And next thing you know, we kind of built the RBR neighborhood. And so I never really found this show, or specifically that show, RBR Weekly Wrestling Talk. I never really found that show being one where we were talking into the void, because like I said, we kind of got to cheat a little bit because we got to start with a built-in audience.
You call it a cheat. I just call it being smart. If you know where an audience is, and you have a way to get to that audience, why would you not use it?
That's true.
So have you ever thought about doing a non-wrestling podcast? I know you like your music. So have you thought about doing one like music?
So what's funny is I guess I'll drop a little bit of a spoiler here, because I recently came to the discovery that one of my colleagues is a big Mariah Carey fan, much like myself. There's actually a Mariah Carey pop vinyl, I think, back there. And so because of that, we have talked about doing this holiday season a Mariah Carey podcast, and we're going to talk about that. And then, honestly, ever since we launched Grapsody 4 weeks ago, or I guess it's been 5 weeks now, we keep seeping into music conversations. Yeah. We had a big conversation this past week on Grapsody about West Coast hip hop and the Bay Area scene, and it was a lot of fun having that conversation.
I really enjoyed that conversation, even though Grapsody is predominantly about wrestling. It's always nice to hear deviation from the main topic.
Yeah, and I love that, honestly, and that's part of that whole thing I was just talking about bringing yourself to the table. That sometimes you're not going to stick to the topic at hand, and that Grapsody is a pro wrestling podcast, but we have other interests. That the three of us, we're all basketball fans. Shout out to Phil and his Bulls, because they're doing quite well. And we're all hip hop fans, but we're all hip hop fans in different ways. Because Reg will give me crap about liking Flo Rida, and Reg, I do like Flo Rida. But we have our things, and we do it. And like I said, if you bring pieces of yourself to the table, when you're podcasting, other than the topic at hand, I think people get to know you a lot better and feel like they know you a lot better. And that's always what I've tried to do. I can't say that was intentional. I think I just tend to word vomit when I talk. And so as a result of that, I'm just the type of person who will spill his heart and spill his feelings about everything when he talks. And so that has allowed the RBR neighborhood and now this Grapsody audience to kind of get to know me a lot better. And yeah, I can't necessarily say that I have any desire to do like a whole series about much else. Like I like wrestling because it's a continuous thing. Wrestling is kind of an easy thing to podcast about because no matter what promotion you're into, they likely run 52 weeks a year. And so you likely won't run out of content. And so that is basically how that works.
Do you think it's possible to do a podcast by yourself, or do you need to have multiple people to really make it work?
I mean, it depends. Yeah, I could do a podcast by myself. I have done podcasts by myself. Because again, if you get me started on a topic, I might not be able to stop. I think one of the I listened to, for example, my old co-host from RBR, Maxwell Baumbach. I think he is the king of doing podcasts by himself. If you ever listen to him do Indies Man or anything along those lines, he is so good. Or Against All Pods, he was so good at basically just being able to handle a topic by himself and guide people through the topic by himself and take the audience where he was going and take them along his thought process. And he didn't necessarily need anybody to kind of bounce thoughts off of. He's very, very good at that. And there's a lot of guys I can listen to who have been able to do it. And I've only done it a couple of times. That's not to say I can't. I like conversation and I like the back and forth and I like banter. And so that's just my preferred style of podcasting, but I could if I wanted to.
Can I try it? I've tried it a couple of times and it never really works for me. It's not that I don't have good opinion, but it feels like I'm dragging the episode along rather than flowing through it, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So how did you get approached to star Grapsody on Fightful? Was it just contacted by Sean, or did you reach out to him, or what happened?
So honestly, Grapsody was kind of a combination of a lot of things kind of happening all at once. In that it started with me doing a side show to RBR called Wrestling with Weekends, where I wanted to do a weekend wrestling show, and so I had started that. I did it for 7 weeks, and in those 7 weeks, I kind of had this rotating second chair next to me, right? I did the show with Jesse Davin was my first week. I have Phil Lindsay on the second week. I had Maddie Anderson. I had Righteous Reg. I had Joe Holbert. I had Barry Murphy, and I had Rob, B Rob of Random Ramblings with Rob, and so I just noticed that the way the show was going, I had a really good rapport with Phil Lindsay when I had him on. I had done a podcast with him back when we did the Revolution post show. And he and I have had good conversations before, and I've always supported the stuff Phil does. I think he's an excellent writer. And then Reg, same deal. I think what Reg does with the Black Wrestling's 500 and his work in PWI is always so good. And he and I did that podcast together, and he and I just had great rapport. But then him and Phil also always had a great relationship. And, you know, Phil had done his old podcast before. And so Reg had kind of mentioned at the end of the show one day, he had said, at the end of the podcast he and I did, he was like, you know, I gave him the obligatory, hey, we got to do this again sometime. And he said, yeah, maybe one day you, me, and Phil will do a podcast. And I was like, yeah, maybe we should. And then the show ended, and I thought, actually, he's right. I think me, him, and Phil should do a podcast. And so that Monday, I approached Phil, and I asked Phil how he would feel about doing the show with me and Reg. And Phil was like, I'm in. And so then I went to Reg, and I said, how would you feel about doing a show with me and Phil? And Reg was like, I'm in. And I was like, sweet, got them both in. And so we started bouncing around ideas and talking about what we wanted the show to be. And then the name Grapsody just kind of came to me, and I put it in the chat, in our group chat, and I was like, how about Grapsody? And they were like, we're in Grapsody. And so we had a podcast set. And then so Grapsody was already going to go with or without Fightful. But I felt like, you know, it was either start this new show kind of on our own, or you know, I thought for the conversation that we wanted to bring to the table, for the conversation we wanted to have, for the type of conversation we wanted to have, and for bringing, I think, because as Phil likes to say, because it's very true, Black people are not a monolith. There's not one opinion among Black people. There's a lot of different takes among Black people because there's a lot of different types of Black people. It is not, there's not a one size fits all for the conversations that Black people are having, especially around sports entertainment. And so we knew what we had to bring to the table. We knew what we had to offer. And so I did approach Sean Ross Sapp about doing the show with Fightful. And I scheduled a meeting with him, and he and I talked about it. And I told him exactly what we were thinking and what we wanted to bring to the table. And Sean was like, okay, I'm in. And he asked when we wanted to do it. And I thought, okay, well, Saturdays was when I was doing wrestling with weekends anyway. Let's do Saturdays. And so that's how that all came about. And Grapsody was just kind of born out of that. And I'm like really grateful to all the support that everybody at Fightful's given us, Jeremy and Joe and Kate and Sean himself. And of course, Jimmy Van has been just, obviously he owns Fightful, and he's just been so gracious to have us there. And so like just all of it coming together the way it did and as quickly as it did, I couldn't be happier.
So what has been your favorite episode so far? For my personal favorite was the one that you did last week. It was really a good laugh, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed the conversation anyway, but last week's was my favorite one. Was one of my favorites so far.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I would say 2 weeks ago, we did the episode that after Reg went to that episode of Raw, and he the way he just ranted on having gone to Raw. And then, of course, he mentioned bringing the Boston baked beans, and we gave him all the crap about bringing beans to Raw. I've had, podcasting 16 years. I've had some great episodes of RBR. I had great episodes of Now Playing Now. I've had great episodes of Morning Toast. Every show I had ever hosted, I've had great episodes of. But I will say that particular episode of Grapsody, episode 3, was some of the best laughs I've had on a podcast ever. I was in tears at the beans conversation, and just so much of that stuff was so much fun. That's probably my favorite episode so far. Was episode 3.
There's something I forgot to ask you a bit earlier. Do you know when you were younger, did you always have the gift of speaking, or was you quite reserved when you were younger?
Honestly, it depended, because I've always been able to speak. My mom has always told me that if you get me started, I don't stop. That's why there's been 4-hour episodes of RBR, because if you get me going, I just can go. But I was a really shy, reserved person, especially as a teenager, that, I didn't have a whole lot of friends, and people who knew me in high school were usually like, wow, he's so quiet. And then, but all my close friends were like, no, he's not. Will Washington doesn't stop talking. And they're like, what are you talking about? This guy never talks. So it depended, because I didn't necessarily have it with strangers. It was always like, if you were close to me, I could just jabber. But then I was a really reserved kid. I was a really reserved teenager. And it wasn't until I turned about 18, 19 that something kind of like switched in me, and I kind of became this like social butterfly, and I just love talking to everybody. And I start random conversations with people in line at the grocery store, because that's just who I am. But I definitely didn't have it as a kid. As a kid, I could talk, but I just didn't have the heart or the will to do so. I had the will because it's me, but I didn't have, you know what I mean.
I enjoyed speaking to everybody as well, because when I was born here, I was told here that I was always going to be non-verbal, and at the age of 6, I just started talking, and now you can't get me to shut up. So yeah. I think everybody that is a podcaster takes a while to find their voice, but once they do, it's hard to get them to shut off.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, once you've got it, it's yours, and it's hard to lose it. I think anyway. 16 years in, I haven't lost it yet. I think once you've got it, you're just gonna keep going.
So, so, so do you know eventually we Grapsity? Would you like to have a guest star, or are you just happy with the three of you?
So we have very much talked about guests, and the plan is for guests in the very, very near future. Because a lot of it has to do with the fact that we wanted to get established as a group first. We want to make sure that people know us as a trio, people know our dynamic with each other and who we are as individuals. And before we started introducing guests into the fold, the kind of cool thing is we all have our ties to pro wrestling in some way, shape, or form. Phil writes for Bleacher Report, and he's done some great interviews over the years. He did that article for Complex just last year where he got to talk to Scorpio Sky and Nyla Rose and Hikaru Shida. Reg, having been around as long as he's been doing things and doing the Black Wrestling's 500, he's gotten to know a lot of talent as well. And then he's got friends in the business. He attends a lot of indie shows. And the cool thing is, for me as well, when you get to know indie wrestlers, and you make friends with indie wrestlers, or you have a cousin, in my case, who was an indie wrestler at one point, the cool thing is, these guys eventually get signed. A lot of indie guys do. And then all of a sudden, you go from knowing guys at your local indie show to knowing guys who are in WWE or knowing guys who are in AEW. And so we've, over the years, all of us have kind of made friends with people who are in the industry and in the business. And we talked from day one that at some point in the very near future, we want to have those guys that we know on Grapsity. And then on top of that, we want to get to know people on Grapsity. And so we're going to do interviews. We've got a lot that we want to do ambitiously. Just at the moment, the goal was to really get us started as a trio first. But at some point, we are going to do guests. And not just guests as far as interviews are concerned, but also just people around, because the community is so big. And I want to make sure that everybody is eating and everybody is at the table. And if Grapsity being on Fightful means that we've gotten kind of a slightly bigger platform than some have gotten, then I want to make sure that that some of the people that have been around us and that we consider friends and things like that also get a piece of that as well, and get to grow their brands as well.
Yeah, so the main point is that you want to make it, or my apology, you want to make it about you three as a whole before you start inviting other people onto it. So it's not just become about the guest, if I've got that right.
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of podcasts out there that are just about the guests, and that's not to say that that's a bad thing. I just want to make sure that that people get to know us before, because people are going to tune in for our guests, and I think that's a good thing. I think it is always a good thing to bring people in to your product by people who are fans of the particular guests you have on. But at the same time, I also want the show, because like I said, for me, a podcast is about bringing yourself to the table. And so I want to make sure that people do know us as well, and know what we bring to the table, and know what we have to offer.
Yeah, I completely understand that. That's the one thing I struggle with sometimes. Because I don't know if you've seen much of my work yet, but it's predominantly interviews. Yeah, so sometimes I can get caught in the rut of just interviewing people. So that's all people really care about. So, so it's something I need to work on.
I mean,
So,
that's okay. Like if that's the product you're putting out there, and because one of the things that when I say bring yourself to the table, one of the things that some people are just good interviewers and people who just the part of who you might be is just somebody who likes to get to know people. And you know, if that is who you are and in your personality, then in that same token, interviewing people is bringing yourself to the table. And so at at the same time, you're still putting out what you have to offer, and what you have to offer is talking to people and asking people questions about themselves and getting your audience to get to know somebody new.
so, so, so do you know, because you have a relative in the business, is it difficult sometimes to give to give constructive criticism when you're related to somebody involved, or is it just as anything else?
Well, I feel like this. Look, pro wrestling is entertainment. And so at the end of the day, constructive criticism or biased criticism, who cares? It's just something you like. And if that's the case, you could put it out there any way you want. It is true that I do have a bias toward, especially toward wrestlers that I either consider friends or wrestlers that I am related to. And so when I see them compete, I'm constantly rooting for them to succeed, regardless of the quality of the work that's being put out. And that said, I don't think they put out bad work anyway. But regardless of, because I'll see people knock certain things that are being done. I'll see it on Twitter. I'll see things like that. And yeah, you won't hear that from me as far as my people are concerned, because I just want to see my people eat. I just want to see my people succeed. I just want to see them have fun while they're doing it. And so, yeah, I'm always going to be a supporter. And it probably is really difficult to me for me to be objective about things like that.
And what I like about you in particular, you've never hidden it. You've already opened the knowledge with people and say, I do have a relative that's in the business. So I respect that, because it would be one thing if you chose to hide it, and then you're being biased for no reason.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is I'm also just very forthright about things that yeah, it would be hard for me to hide that at this point, because you know, with my cousin Shane Strickland, you know, he had done RBR years ago. We had him on the show, I think 6 or 7 years ago, and that was back when he was in Lucha Underground as Killshot. And you know, I put out there that this is my cousin, and that our dads are brothers, and that, you know, this is somebody that is up and coming in the wrestling industry and that I want to see succeed. And so when he got signed to WWE, I couldn't hide that fact, because it was already out there before he ever got signed that he was my relative. So like on that same front, even if I wanted to hide it, I couldn't. And but even still, why would I want to hide that? Dude's on SmackDown. He's a former North American champion. He has had such a great run, and he's now in Hit Row, and he, as far as I'm concerned, is the leader of Hit Row. And I think there's much more success headed his way. They just kind of kicked off a feud with the New Day last week on SmackDown. I think the sky's the limit for those guys, and so I'm gonna root for him as long as I can.
As a fan, I must say, he's very entertaining, either in the ring or on the microphone. It's very engaging with the viewers.
I think he's one of the best in the ring, period. I've watched him work in front of audiences that had no idea who he was, and by the end of the match were chanting Swerve. He made I guess you could kind of call it main roster debut as far as like touring was concerned, at the American Airlines Arena in Miami, where he had a match with Drew Gulak, who at the time was the cruiserweight champion on 205 Live. So this was after an episode of SmackDown. And he kind of came out, and there were like a handful of people maybe chanting Swerve. Not a whole lot of people knew who he was, but I swear by the end of that match, people were chanting Swerve, and people were getting to know who he was. And I think that is a testament to his abilities in the ring. When he gets going, when he gets that fire under him in the ring, and he starts letting off that flurry of offense and hitting some of the cool shit that he can do. And this is as a babyface. I think he does such a great job of just capturing the crowd. And that is such a skill in pro wrestling. And that's why I do think he is truly one of the best. And that's as a babyface. Now he's currently working as a heel. And I think that the exploration of his heel work kind of shows that he's way more versatile than people thought he was. And I couldn't say enough great things about Isaiah Swerve Scott. I just think he is just cream of the crop. And I think the sky's the limit for him. Whenever somebody says, and I see it a lot, people say that he has just star written all over him. No question about that for me. I feel like you could absolutely see that this is a man who could possibly, if given the opportunity, transcend pro wrestling. Because also he's a great rapper. That's the other thing too. The man also, because if you haven't heard what he puts out there as far as not just with Hit Row, but also Sports City, him and Montezi do great work. They've got a song with Big Swole that was pretty much like my go-to anthem 2 years ago for the longest time. I just loved it so much. I could, like I said, I could go on and on. If you get me started, I wouldn't stop. There's so much goodness I could say about just all of them as people.
Right, even when we were younger.
As far as wrestling was concerned,
yeah,
and I've taken a couple of bumps, and I decided not for me, because falling down on a hard surface is exactly what it sounds like. As much as there are slight tricks to it, like slapping the mat and whatnot and breaking your fall, all of that. At the end of the day, it still knocks the wind out of you. It's still like, obviously those guys are adjusted to it. They can do it and do it fine. But the first time I took that bump, I decided this is not for me. But I'll tell you about it, and I could talk about it. And I can tell you what I like about it, but doing it myself, not for me.
I always say, yeah, if I did not have this disability that I have, yeah, I probably would at least try to train at least, because it's one of my, sometimes you always wonder that thing, and I've always wondered what would I would have been like if I would have tried to train just out of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously I can't, but you know what I mean, like you always think like certain things that can never really happen, but you always think like then.
Yeah. And I honestly like, I can look back at that and say that, I almost miss having the dream, right? Because at one point it was the dream, I'm going to be a pro wrestler. I'm going to travel the world and do all these things. And then it was like the first time I realized it wasn't for me. I do miss having I do miss having the dream. I'll say that much. And like, it being a part of my imagination of like, all it would take is me getting into pro wrestling and then I'd be a world champion. And instead, I'm here talking about it, but I'm talking about it with you, and I enjoy doing that.
Have you ever thought about doing commentary or doing ring announcing or being a manager?
I've thought about both. I mean, like commentary is fun, and it is very much something that I can do and have done. I don't know if I could do it full time, but I've given it thought. Yeah.
where do you think wrestling media will be in 5 years? Like with podcasting, that sort of thing. Do you think it will be that, or do you think the bubble would have burst and a lot of podcasters would have fallen off? If you know what I mean.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because there's been such a cycle. Like I was literally just looking yesterday at RBR's peak numbers. And when did RBR hit its peak? RBR hit its peak in 2019. And what happened in 2019? It was the launch of AEW and NXT going head to head. And so I think wrestling podcasts, specifically podcasts that cover pro wrestling, will continue to grow the more interest in pro wrestling itself grows. And so if wrestling in 5 years is bigger than it is today, if we have a kind of a full-fledged war between companies and you know, by 5 years from now, you know, obviously contracts will have expired in AEW. We'll have seen talent probably go back and forth. And I think free agent season will be a lot bigger. And I think that will end up growing the industry. I think podcasts will grow with that. I think when the industry is at its most quiet, I think that's what grows the wrestler podcast. Because when wrestling, say 5-6 years ago, was really just like monopolized by WWE, and Impact was kind of at their low lows, although some would argue that's today. And the indie scene was kind of trying to figure itself out. One of the things people wanted to hear was podcasts from former wrestlers talking about the glory days. And so we did get a rise in podcasts from guys like Steve Austin, guys like Ric Flair. And I think that it'll happen one way or the other. It's one of those, I think, podcasts that cover wrestling will grow if wrestling grows. If wrestling shrinks again, I think that's when we see a rise in podcasts of, you know, obviously, if AEW folds tomorrow, we're going to hear podcasts from guys like Jon Moxley and Tony Khan and Chris Jericho and talking about the glory days of AEW, right? And if AEW continues to grow, then we're going to see more content from guys like me who are going to just continue talking about it. So I can't predict where it's going to go because there's a lot of intangibles that could change a lot of things. But I will say that I think wrestling podcasts will do well no matter what. It's just the type of wrestling podcast.
A couple more general wrestling questions, then we'll wrap it up. Is that okay?
Okay.
So, as you've just mentioned, AEW, I forgot to be honest, AEW has really, I don't want to say save my interest, but it definitely made me more excited about pro wrestling. To be honest, watching WWE week to week, it's very unsatisfying. I feel like there's no reason to watch week to week because there's not really much storyline continuation. Like with AEW, it feels like you're watching one continuous story, and then when you watch WWE, you might see one thing one week, and then the next week they've done something that completely counter predict. But you know what I mean? Like basically the story part and started again week to week.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with everything you said there because I think anybody that follows me knows that I like AEW. That's not to say that I like them because of who they are as a company or, you know, or I like the initials AEW. Like that has nothing to do with it. It's really because they're putting on the type of pro wrestling that I like. And so because that's happening, it does interest me more, right? I feel like week to week, Wednesday nights, I'm excited because I'm getting an exciting show. I'm the type of person who likes lengthy matches. I like when the product is focused on the wrestling in the ring. I'm not a big fan of like soap opera type drama, which is what like SmackDown and things like that offer. And that's not to say I dislike SmackDown. I don't dislike SmackDown. But I just feel like the type of wrestling that's for me is very in-ring focused, and AEW gives me that. I like storytelling when it's being told in the ring, not necessarily when commentary and video packages and long drawn out promos are trying to do the storytelling for me. And so, yeah, I am excited about AEW as a product because I feel like it's a wrestling product that is geared toward who I am as a wrestling fan.
And as you say, on AEW, we very rarely get 20-minute promo. We might get a 5-minute promo, and then
right,
they might fill up that promo with enough content to make it feel like it's been going for 20 minutes when it's only been going for 5.
Yeah, I think that because there's been some great promos in AEW, especially in the last couple of years, but yeah, there's not necessarily the long drawn out promo. You're never gonna get that that 20-minute opening segment where somebody comes out, welcomes you to the show, does some general talking about general things, is interrupted by somebody who then comes out and they air their grievance, and then they go back and forth with their grievances, and then authority figure comes out and says, this is a great idea, we're gonna have this match tonight, and then that's the main event, and it's like rinse and repeat that segment. You're never going to get that. And so as a result, I feel like the promos tend to have more substance, and I'm happier with that. Again, it has nothing to do with simply liking them more as a company, and more so with that company putting on the show that I prefer to watch.
For me personally, I just want to see a good product, and I do have my criticisms of AEW. I think
we all do.
They need to be a lot better with the diversity of the roster as a whole.
Yeah, and we've talked about that. We have that conversation on Grapsity. I think there's some carefulness that has to happen with that conversation, and I want AEW to handle that topic with care, because what I don't want is to simply push a black person because you found a random black person. I want it to be, I want to feel like I feel about Kenny Omega, about the first black talent AEW pushes. I don't want it to feel like somebody that they just kind of grabbed just to do it, because I don't think that's what WWE did, and I'm not saying that's what WWE did. I think Big E is one of the best. I think Big E's an all-time great. I have said before how much I think Xavier Woods is one of my role models in terms of who he is and how he's been able to get there, and so when we talk about that, a lot of these guys have been around a long time, and a lot of those guys, Big E, it was around for 9 years before he won a world title. Kofi was around 11 years before he won a world title. Bobby Lashley, 15 years, and so on. And my point there, and I'm not saying that it needs to take that long, because it shouldn't take that long. And I'm not saying for AEW it should take that long. But what I am saying is that I really want AEW to push that. When they push their black talent, I want it to be the right talent, and I want it to be there in the same way that it was with looking at it from the aspect of AEW pushing Mexican wrestlers. They pushed the Lucha Bros, and they pushed the Lucha Bros at the right time. They pushed the Lucha Bros to tag team titles as they were kind of in the midst of one of the best runs of their careers, as they put themselves on the map as one of the best tag teams of all time. And in that same way, I want to feel like good example. I think Scorpio Sky is one of the best in-ring talents AEW has, period, point blank. And I am hoping, I do think, just saying this out loud, I think he's going to be the guy to beat Sammy Guevara. And I want it to feel like Scorpio Sky. I want everybody to feel like Scorpio Sky is one of the best. I want them to feel like when they see him holding the TNT championship and being kind of the face of, as they call it, the network, when he holds that title, I want it to feel like, damn, he is one of the best in the ring. He's one of the best talents they've got, and he's a world champion. I don't necessarily want, because I feel like the reaction, if it just kind of happened out of nowhere, I feel like the reaction would be, oh, AEW is pushing a black talent. Good. I don't necessarily just want that. I want it to be AEW pushed a black talent who is one of the best, in the same way that Kenny Omega is one of the best, in the same way that that Hangman Adam Page is one of the best, in the same way that Jon Moxley is one of the best. I want to feel like the person they push is not only black, but is one of the best. That's how I feel, and that's what I want to see out of pro wrestling.
So just as an example, if AEW Jonathan Gresham in and he beat Sammy Guevara for the TNT Championship, I would not have any complaint to that, because he's one of the best in the world. Period.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the thing is, one of the things I have felt is that when it comes to AEW and signing black talent, one of the things that is going to allow Tony Khan to put his money where his mouth is Ring of Honor. And Ring of Honor essentially releasing everybody from their contracts, because for the longest time, you know, when AEW first launched, there was a question of, you guys didn't sign much black talent. And then the response to that was typically, well, you know, what high profile black talent was available, in the same way that the Bucks were available, in the same way that Kenny was available, in the same way that Cody was available. Fair response, I suppose. But now all of a sudden, there's going to be a slew of high profile indie black talent that's going to be available. And in that same way, and I'm glad that they snatched up Lee Moriarty, because I feel like while he wasn't necessarily high profile, his profile was growing, and they definitely made sure to get him on board. And, you know, he got his All Elite graphic, and I'm really happy for Lee Moriarty. And at the same time, like I said, I do want to see like a Shane Taylor Productions get signed, and there's going to be a lot of guys that I want to see get because I think everybody's Ring of Honor contract is going to be up at the end of this year, so there's 2 more months left. When those 2 months hit, I want to see AEW take a look at those guys. I want to see them take a look, and I keep saying guys, but also Trish Adora needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are going to need to be looked at and not passed over. And January is going to be the point where Tony Khan can put his money where his mouth is on the top. I want to see JTG get signed. I feel like people don't realize that JTG in Crime Time was only in his early 20s. And so when a lot of people talk about JTG, they're like, oh, yeah, he's passed. You know, his time has passed. The guy's 34. He's got all the time. Obviously not all the time, but he's got a lot more time. He's got a lot left in the tank. And that dude is fit. He is so fit. He's so athletic. JTG is a guy that I want to see signed and get one more crack at being a single star that he didn't get to be in WWE.
Do you know the CBS tournament? Yeah, obviously, I do. So far, it's been done really well. At least I think so.
I think so too.
But my main concern is I think they're going to give the back to Jade, and I just don't think it's going to work very well, because she's still quite new, and I don't think she'll be a good first champion.
I disagree. I think that I think it's almost perfect for somebody like Jade, because Jade is undefeated. Jade is basically a mountain to climb, in both physically and proverbially. And so when I think about Jade Cargill, I feel like if you combine those two things, if you make it so that her undefeated streak suddenly has a bigger attachment to it, because the first person who beats Jade Cargill is going to get a big rub out of it. I think that all of a sudden this is the person to beat Jade Cargill. But could you imagine if not only is there now a win attached to beating Jade Cargill, but all of a sudden now beating the undefeated Jade Cargill now gets you a championship? I think she's the perfect person for the first TBS champion, because then she can go continue the undefeated streak, continue to be dominant, but then whoever finally beats her not only conquered the streak, but has the gold to prove it. And that's why, to me, I would go with Jade Cargill. I think that it's actually the opposite, I think, of her being too green to do it. I think, if anything, that actually kind of protects her, because all of a sudden now she's the champion. Not everybody gets a crack at Jade Cargill. You have to earn your crack at Jade Cargill. And so therefore she isn't the type of person who should be having matches all the time. She's a person who should only be having matches when it matters. And I think in that sense, it protects Jade Cargill and doesn't necessarily expose her as much. That's my thought.
And if you remember in WCW, Goldberg was the US champion, and
He was.
I think sometimes I feel like sometimes you don't need to have 20-minute matches. You can do it in 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was a bit hasty there, to be honest. Who knows, man? So my last and final question:
Yes.
Are you looking forward to Full Gear?
I am. I'm going to be talking about Full Gear a lot. So this will be the first AEW pay-per-view this year that I won't get to attend, because I'll be at Paul Griffin's wedding in Houston. But I will be doing a lot of Full Gear coverage for Fightful, and then also for Barstool as well. And I'm very much looking to Full Gear. I look at that card, and that card looks so good with Kenny and Hangman. I've been waiting on that for a really long time. I wasn't sure when it was time to pull the trigger on that, but I'm glad it's right now. And I'm looking forward to the tournament final. I think it is going to end up being Moxley and Bryan. Bryan's my all-time favorite wrestler. Moxley was my favorite wrestler last year. What I love about Bryan right now is how physical and violent he's gotten. But when you think about violence in pro wrestling, there's nobody more violent than Jon Moxley. So I think that's a great combination. What else is on that card? I think that Ty Conti and Britt Baker is going to deliver. I think that whatever they end up doing, because I think it's going to be the Young Bucks and Jurassic Express. Those two teams had a match back at All Out 2020 that I think was the match of the night and got overlooked because of the fact that it wasn't for the titles. But then if Christian ends up returning and facing Adam Cole, I think that'll deliver. If we end up with CM Punk versus Eddie Kingston, that's going to be a blast. And so just really, MJF and Darby, I think is going to come through. And I'm just spouting matches off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of what else is on that card. But, FTR and the Lucha Bros is another one that I think has already delivered the 2 times we've seen it. We saw it last summer in the match where Dax removed Rey Fenix's mask, and then we just saw it a couple weeks ago with the AAA tag titles on the line. But this time, just in a straight up AEW World Tag Team title match, the Lucha Bros versus FTR, I think is going to deliver. So really, just looking at that card, and there's a lot more you could throw on there. But for now, I think this is a card that's going to deliver. I wish I could be there in Minneapolis because I've never been to Minneapolis, but I think it's going to be a great card.
Right. Brian Danielson epitomizes what I love about AEW. What I love about AEW, because I've been watching wrestling for nearly 20 years now. So seeing Brian Danielson do Ring of Honor stuff like I have to 5 and all that stuff. It really makes me happy, and it awards long time viewers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. And Brian's so great, isn't he? I just I love Brian so much. And you could tell he's just having the time of his life doing the wrestling he's getting to do right now and getting to be the character he's being right now. I love Brian. I couldn't say enough great things about him.
I think he's one of the best in the world. I think because of his age and because he was in WWE for so long, a lot of it, there's some people that sleep on him.
Yeah, but there's no reason to. He's the best in the world. I don't think there's anybody who does this better than Brian Danielson.
Okay, and mate, thank you for coming on. Do you want to promote your stuff?
Absolutely. You can check out Grapsody. It airs every Saturday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That is at youtube.com/Fightful. And thank you for having me. And I really appreciate you reaching out to me, and I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk with you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you to Will Washington for coming on, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will speak to you soon, and it will be out very, very, very soon. So have a good day.